Thank you for coming out tonight for our Yes panel, sponsored by the Sport Management Communication Arts majors. I'm Steve Bolson, and we'd like to welcome our very special guests tonight. By way of introduction, first, our first gentleman began his career in 1974 as a desk assistant with NBC Sports. You're a major in the program. Give that a little bit of thought. 18 years later, he worked his way up to a producer position, worked 4 Super Bowls, 3 post-game shows for the Super Bowl, went on to the Baseball Network and to ABC, where he was vice president of production, overseeing Monday Night Football, the BCS Championship Series, and Wide World of Sports. He has the distinction of having been with the Yes Network, I guess before there was a Yes Network, as he was part of the group in 2001 that was brought on board before it officially launched in 2002 as the Executive VP of Production and Programming. Right now he serves as the President of Production and Programming, and under his stewardship, Yes Network has earned 235 New York Emmy nominations and 55 Emmy Awards. He's also an honorary degree recipient from St. Thomas Aquinas College in 2014. Please welcome John Filippelli. Our other special guest tonight is a familiar face to a lot of people, very entrenched locally in the area, grew up in West Nyack, New York, drafted by the Boston Red Sox in 1992, played 14 Major League Baseball seasons, over 1,000 games, also 3 years as a New York Yankee, having the distinction of being Randy Johnson's personal catcher. I'm sure there are stories there that that we may be graced with over the course of the evening. After his retirement in 2006, he also joined the Yes Network as a commentator and has earned 3 Emmy nominations for his work. Closer to home, he's also instrumental as a founding owner of the Rockland Boulders baseball team, and in 2009, he was awarded an honorary degree from St. Thomas Aquinas College. Please welcome John Flaherty. Now we'll have some questions here first that I'll pose as an open forum sort of thing, and then we'll throw it out to our wonderful attendees here. First, we have a lot of people who are aspiring to get involved in the sports business, working in sports management and or communications. So if both of you would explain maybe briefly what it was like, what it took for you to get into the field, how did you get where you are today? And Mr. Filippelli would be so nice as to start. We've got you, John.
Mr. Flaherty would start. But
well, you can flip the coin.
He's my boss. I do whatever he tells me to do. So.
That's the first lesson of the evening.
How did I start? How did I get in this?
Well, how did you get to where you are? What was your path? We talked a little bit about when you started at NBC.
Actually, it's funny because in your introduction, the thing that I've done the most of is actually baseball.
Mm-hmm.
The other things were sort of, I don't want to say ancillary, but they were just part of the building blocks of a career. I did actually 8 World Series as a producer.
Mm-hmm.
And I was started on the NBC Game of the Week, which went away a long time ago. There really was at one point only one game of the week. It was on Saturday afternoon, and if you wanted to say watch the Dodgers play the Cubs, which you could watch the Dodgers, every night on your if you have the right the subscription from MLB, you can watch the game every night. You can watch every game from every team. There really was one game that you would get out of your market once a week, and it was called the Game of the Week. And I actually started working on that. And with a lot of legendary people who went on to be, they're legendary names to, if you're in the sports business and you follow, or someone who follows the business. I was really fortunate. I learned from the absolute best people there were to teach you. And, I was a very willing recipient to the information that they had to offer. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. My dad owned a bar across the street from Ebbets Field in Brooklyn. I had the distinction, I was 3 years old, and so it's a little foggy, but, I knew players like Jackie Robinson. I met them, I can't say I know them, I was really extremely young, but Jackie Robinson and Preacher Rowe and Carl Furillo and Duke Snyder and Gil Hodges and, Roy Campanella, and if any of you know something about the Brooklyn Dodgers or huge baseball fans, from the 50s, those names will resonate with you. So I grew up, that was the backdrop to my life. And my dad's bar business, like I said, was across the street from the park, and the players used to come in there all the time. It was a different era. I mean, players needed to have jobs in the off season. Believe it or not, every player had a job in the off season. They didn't have the luxury of being able to train. They used spring training to actually train themselves, and they had to network and to work in the off season doing various things. So they needed to socialize with the fans. It was an entirely different era than it is now. Entirely different for a lot of reasons that are obvious, and I'm sure you guys all know about. Times change, but that's where my love of the game came from. And when I was 21 years old, I took the tour of NBC. Said, what a great place to work. I left in the middle of the tour, which you could not do now because of the world being what it is and security reasons. You can't do that. But I was fortunate enough that I left. I ran into a couple of people, and they saw my passion for sports. And I didn't start in the sports department. I started in the wire room, ripping off copy and putting it on a hook so somebody else could read it. But I would read the stories, and I would say, these are really great sports stories. And the sports people would come in. I would say, you should see this, or you should see this. And after a while, I was actually doing their jobs for them, which made me a very popular person because I would do that. So, and eventually that led to me getting into NBC Sports proper. And from there, I just, my love of the game, baseball, football, basketball. NBC was a major player in all those sports. And that's really where my foundation was built. I spent 18 years there doing World Series, doing Super Bowls, doing NCAA basketball, the tournament that is still going on now. I mean, we used to have that at NBC, and I had the privilege of working on that. Every big sporting event you can mention, I was involved with and started in the ground up and just worked myself up. But I always kept going. That was the key, was I never really had to look backwards. I would reach a point, I'd work really hard, and something would come along, and I got really lucky. But I also made my own luck. I worked really hard. And just to sort of wrap up this point, because it's almost time for us to all leave, because I've been going on for an hour. They were rehearsing a show when I first started at NBC. The show was not on the air yet. And this little show was one floor above where I was. It was called Saturday Night Live. The original Saturday Night Live was in rehearsals when I started in the business, and I started at NBC. And I used to go up there and watch it. Nobody minded. They didn't care. I'd say, listen, I'll be quiet as a church mouse. Could I just watch? And they said, yeah, sure. And I would sit and I'd learn. And I saw what producers did and what directors did and what stage managers did and what script people did and camera people did. So I learned the business that way. And I did that with several shows that were in production in New York. People didn't mind, like I said, as long as you were quiet and you sort of kept to yourself and you sort of figured it out. And it was an education that no school could have ever given me. No book could have ever given me. A lot of great schools, a lot of great books. But to be hands-on like that and learn from the kind of people I was privileged to work for, around, and with is just the best experience you could get.
Well, I will admit to having cribbed Mr. Filippelli's resume a little bit because we are limited to only about 2 hours, but I would suggest if you want to see a pretty extensive background, this gentleman has covered some tremendous events, and he's spoken a little bit about that as well. With that, for John Flaherty, now you've taken a different path through athletics, and how did you get to where you are, and what do you think that it required from your perspective?
Well, Steve, I was lucky enough to play 14 years in the major leagues, and when you're engulfed in your career as a player, you're never thinking about what's going to be coming in the future. And I actually have to give my agent some credit. When I signed with the Yankees for the last 3 years, I was a backup player. And he told me to try to get as much experience as I could on the camera, doing interviews, just being very open with the media and try to develop some relationships. With the possibility that broadcasting might be something in the future. In 2005, my last year with the Yankees, one of the great years with Randy Johnson when I got fired after that year, I had to think about what was next, what was going to happen. And my agent had a relationship with, I'll call him Flip, my boss. And he was nice enough to set up I don't know if it was an interview or just a meeting that we had down in the city at his office. And we got to know each other a little bit and talk. And it was very informal and just got to kind of meet and greet and told me a lot about the business. And I had my notebook open, writing down things, trying to learn and see if this might be a possibility. But even at that point, I wasn't sure that broadcasting was something I wanted to get into. After that, I signed with the Boston Red Sox as a free agent. and actually called Flip and said, listen, if I sign with the Red Sox, is this going to damage my chance of working for the Yankees or for Yes? And he assured me that it wouldn't. So I gave playing one more shot, went down to spring training, was there for a couple of weeks, and retired. And when I retired on a Monday, there were a bunch of voicemails on my cell phone from, I think Fox was on there, MSG, SNY, the Met station. And, you know, obviously I called Flip, or my agent called Flip, to find out if there was any opportunities with Yes, and was told that the roster was filled at that point. We were, you know, into games in spring training, and Flip already had his talent roster set. So he told my agent to go out and get some experience in broadcasting, and we'll revisit this next year. So with that, I went to a couple of auditions with SNY, did some pre and post game for spring training shows, had no idea what I was doing, was petrified out of my mind, was sitting at a desk like a robot, didn't have any clue. And Kirk Gowdy Jr. was running SNY, I think he still is, was impressed with what I did and was getting ready to offer me a contract. And before I knew it, Flip got in touch with my agent. Somebody by the name of Mr. Steinbrenner had seen me on TV with the Yankees, or with the Mets, I'm sorry. Didn't really like that was a possibility that might go forward. And the next thing I know, Flip said, you know, I don't know how we're going to do this, but I'm going to offer you a 30-game package. And that was 2006. And my first assignment was opening day 2006. And my producer, Jared Boschneck, who was at the stadium, is now the pre and post game producer, threw a microphone in my hand and said, go out there and go do some interviews and kind of go figure it out from there. So it was diving into the deep end of the pool quickly. Interviewed Johnny Damon, Jorge Posada, Derek Jeter. Had a live interview with Jeter on the field after the game, which was a complete disaster. Didn't even know how to throw it back up to the booth. But from there, Flip gave me some opportunities. Gave me some time in the studio with Bob Lorenz. Kind of figured it out, got a little more comfortable, and by the end of 2006, I was working games in the booth with Bobby Mercer, Kenny Singleton, Michael Kay, Jim Cott. So really, I got into it because of the opportunity that Flip gave me. And I'll never forget one of the things that he told me when we had our interview or our meeting. He said, you're a backup player for the New York Yankees, and you don't have the name recognition that Paul O'Neill or some of these other big name players have. And in order to be successful in this business, you're going to have to work harder, and you're going to have to do a better job than those guys because they have the bigger names. So when I got into the broadcasting, I dove into it head first and tried to really learn as much as I could. Watched myself, the tapes of myself after I did an appearance, and critiqued and listened. It was very uncomfortable. It was not a pleasant experience, but you kind of live and you learn and you figure out how to do it. And from there, now it's 10 years later, this guy's still giving me contracts. So I'm doing 70 games for Yes this year. I'll be in the studio, I'll be in the booth. I'm kind of doing it all. So that's how it started.
And just to follow up, something that a lot of our athletes will have as they look to get into the management ranks, and I want to follow up with you, John Flaherty. What was it like for you going from being a player to being the other side of the microphone? Was that difficult at first? Was it awkward at all? And how did you adjust to that?
It was awkward. It was terrifying. It was all the things that are uncomfortable about doing something that you really have no experience doing. It's so different to be on the other side as a player being interviewed and you're being asked these questions and you pretty much can tell what they're going to ask and you feel very comfortable doing it. Now being on the other side of the camera and the red light's on and you're in charge of either interviewing somebody or looking into the camera and kind of figuring it out on the fly, it was uncomfortable, it was frightening, and as I've done it now for 10 years, you still get nervous, you still have tense moments, but you find a way to get through it and get better at it. And doing the games really has become very easy. It's been very conversational. Watch the game, kind of say what's on your mind, but also have a filter so I don't get my boss in trouble with some of the things that you might want to say. And it's been very comfortable now.
And I want to go back to John Filippelli briefly. You mentioned over 40 years in the industry and how things have changed. And for prospective job seekers, what kind of things do you think have changed maybe from the way you entered the professional industry? And what kind of things are the same? What are some of the same attributes that you're looking for now from a new hire?
Well, for one thing, you can't leave a tour and wander around a building anymore. That's kind of not going to happen, given security and the world in which we live now. So, I mean, what I was able to do then was, you know, you can get away with that then, you couldn't certainly get away with that now. So, and even the job that I wound up taking doesn't even exist anymore in the business. So there was also no such thing as wire copy and machine, those things. UPI is that, you know, there was UPI, Reuters, the Associated Press. UPI was a huge wire service. You know, you guys will, you know, get your news, consume it on various platforms, and get it disseminated on various different levels. In the old days, what the networks would do would be they would subscribe to news services, and they would pay United Press International, and they would have correspondents and people all over the world, and they would file a story. Something would happen. There would be a war or an explosion or a fire or something would happen someplace in the country or around the world. They would have correspondents who were able to be there, get there, you know, make their calls, do whatever, cover the story, put it together, and then, you know, send it out on a wire service to all the networks. And we have what we call rip and read, where I would just basically rip off the copy, and I would hand it to the editor, and they might have an announcer go right in the booth, go right on the air, and read what UPI or Associated Press or whatever the wire service would give them. So, I mean, that's so archaic now, you can't even conceive of it, but that was the way. I mean, I still have it home. The first big show that I worked on, it was at NBC News, was the Nixon resignation, August of 1974. He resigned as President of the United States because of the Watergate scandal. And it was an urgent, came over as 4 bells, which was an urgent, ding, 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 ding. And I remember the copy going what was coming. And I ripped the copy off. It says, Richard Nixon resigns as President of the United States. And I gave it to the editor. And they immediately, of course, NBC got it on the air, as did ABC and CBS. Those were really the only places you could go in those days. There weren't news cycles. There wasn't even cable television. None of that stuff even existed. So it's such a bygone era. And to try and use the methods that one would use to get hired in those days, to try to apply them to today is it's beyond apples and oranges. It's like, you know, the delta, the difference is light years. So, you know, all I could say to you to really get back and address your question as best I can is there are what you look for are the same things that will get you anywhere in life. That is, you know, passion for a product, you know, a tenacity without. There's a real borderline about tenacity, and I get it every day, and I don't mean it in a bad way. I really appreciate. I just hired somebody to do soccer, but mostly because the guy was the biggest pain in the ass I may have met in 40 years. The guy would not take no for an answer, but I found his passion compelling. Yeah, I mean, he had certain level of talent. There's no question. The guy had talent, and I don't know much about soccer, so I figure the fact that I don't know soccer, he has talent. He understands it. He had passion. This was kind of a one-off. We were doing one sort of pre-game show, if you will. And I said, okay, he knows what he's doing. He's passionate. I don't really, his methodology is a little beyond me. And his people skills seem to be a little off. But you know what? I think the guy could do the job. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the thing that will separate you, what separates you from 700 other people, 1,000 other people, is ultimately going to be your passion. I love baseball. I love baseball as much as anybody in this country. I mean, I couldn't conceive of when I was younger. So, I mean, I'm sure there were a lot of very passionate people who loved the game as much as I did and knew as much as I did, but they didn't know more, and I knew that. And I used that. That was my life. I grew up around it. I played it. I loved it. And I was able to parlay that into a living. If you spend any time around me at all, that passion just explodes out of me. You know, yes, I've done the NFL, and I really enjoyed that. I've done the NBA. I really enjoyed that. I've done the NCAAs. I've really enjoyed that. I've done the Olympics. I've really enjoyed that. I've enjoyed all those building blocks. But at the end of the day, my passion for baseball translated to the Yankees and translated to a regional sports network when there really weren't. There were regional sports networks, but there was nothing like what George wanted to do with Yes. And that was the difference. And the fact that I could apply the information I had learned through my career doing other things and that passion for the game is what was able to put me where I got. But again, the simple answer is be passionate in what you want to do. If you don't believe in it, if you're not 175% committed to it, you're not going to succeed. Because there's always going to be, there are people that really want to do this. And it's not the sexy part of the business. You know, yeah, there's a certain sexiness to go on the field for the game. You go up to, you go up to, you know, you can go up to, used to be able to go to Vegeta, Posada, you know, you go up to Andy Pettit, you go up to guys, you know, now it's a little different. You go up to Stephen Drew, you go up to, you know, okay, that joke's not going anywhere. I'll just stop right there. Sorry, Stephen, if you ever get to see this, you're not a bad guy. Although you shouldn't be at second base.
Oh my gosh.
That's right, I'm not holding back. But again, it's your passion. That's got to be the thing that separates you. Love something, and don't let anybody tell you you can't do it. You hear it all the time. Oh, there's no jobs. It's true, there really aren't any jobs. But that doesn't mean it'll be forever. He's right now, you're in a temporary holding pattern. And take anything you can to get your foot in the door. I don't care what it is. Whatever it is, just take it and get in the door, because it's about building relationships. Passion, get in the door, build relationships, get to know people, and that will translate to some sort of job. And then you start to climb a ladder if you're good enough.